My name is Angela Sterritt. I'm Gitxsan from Gitnamax, and I currently reside on Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh territories, which I am on right here today in this beautiful forest, which is my safe place as an Indigenous woman, but also as a human being. I've been a journalist for more than 20 years, and I've been investigating the disappearances and murders of Indigenous women and girls for about 10 years. And all of that journalism has been transformed into a book I've written called Unbroken, which is part memoir and part looking into the murders and disappearances of a number of women. And it's also looking at colonial violence in Canada and how does it happen that Indigenous women, people of this land who are the leaders, the backbone of our community, have become disproportionately impacted by violence against us to this day. According to statistics gathered by the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, Indigenous women are 12 times as likely to be murdered or missing than any other woman in Canada, and 16 times as likely to be murdered as white women. When it comes to intimate partner violence, Indigenous women experience it more frequently and more severely than non-Indigenous women. Simply being Indigenous and female is a risk. Even though Indigenous women and girls make up less than 4% of the female population in Canada, from 2001 to 2015, we made up 25% of all female homicide victims in Canada. Indigenous women and girls are more likely to experience violence than any other race of women in Canada. And here's another thing. Statistics around lesser charges and sentencing of those who kill Indigenous women and girls versus non-Indigenous, and the discrepancies in media coverage between the two groups show that people who kill Indigenous women and girls may feel that they will get away with it because the legal system, the judicial system, the media, and the public seem to care far less if an Indigenous woman goes missing or is murdered than if the woman is white. What the disproportionate statistics around violence against Indigenous women and girls tell me is that we still have a lot of outstanding issues. When we're talking about what to do to increase safety for Indigenous women and girls, we need to talk about speaking out about colonial violence and racism. We can't have people afraid to talk about colonization, not just of the past, but how it exists today, how it exists not just in terms of racism and paternalism and colonial attitudes in institutions, but also looking, acknowledging, and addressing the way that trauma has unfolded from these institutions all the way to today. Intergenerational trauma is affecting Indigenous people, children and elders, middle-aged people to this day, and there's not enough being done in order to facilitate healing for Indigenous people. And largely that comes to the silencing of Indigenous voices that we've seen as a result of erasing history and also erasing the experiences of Indigenous people today. It's hard to get non-Indigenous Canadians to even believe that colonial violence exists, let alone act on it to create safety and equality for Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people. Things like the National Inquiry just can't solve all the problems that contribute to the oppression of and the denial of rights to Canada's most vulnerable. We need to really set the stage and set the tone for how we're going to be allies for Indigenous women and girls, how we're going to speak out about colonial violence, but also how we want to pave a new way forward. What does that look like when it comes to education, when it comes to healing, when it comes to reciprocity, when it comes to decolonizing our institutions? What will it take for our societies to be safe so that when I'm walking down the street, when I'm in a place of employment, I don't wish for every moment of the day that I was back here to feel safe? But today, I see young Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people reclaiming our safety, our language, our culture, our lands, and our power. And I'm also witnessing us taking back joy as the burden of addressing systemic racism and violence is shared more widely.